So now let's talk about what would happen if we wanted to figure out any point on the unit circle. So past 120, the next angle we're going to look at is 135 and beyond. But we really don't want to do a video on every single point. So I'm going to give you a shortcut, some simple steps to figure out any point on the unit circle. Now remember, for right now we're just going to focusing on multiples of 30 degrees and multiples of 45 degrees. There are plenty of other points in the unit circle. So let's see, let's just go back to 120 and figure out how can we get there using the first quadrant. So what is the point on the unit circle at 120 degrees? Well, the first thing you're going to do is just sketch your angle. Okay. So bringing back our app, it'd be this big red arc right here. Let's just pretend we don't know what the point is yet. So that's your point on the unit circle. Now remember, the unit circle goes all the way around to 360 degrees. Later on we'll talk about what happens after that. Of course the angle would grow, but we're just focusing on 360 right now. So the first thing is just to sketch your angle. And of course you need to know the basics of sketching an angle on a circle. It's not too bad though. 120 is just 30 degrees past 90. The next thing you're going to do is find your reference angle. The reference angle is just the shortest angle to the x-axis. So in this particular case, here's our 120 degree angle, but we're really just 60 degrees from this straight line, which is 180. So just keep in mind what your reference angle is. In this case it's 60. Now why do we need to know the reference angle? You're going to take this angle and go back to the first quadrant. So basically every point on the unit circle can be referenced to the first quadrant. So we're going to go back to the first quadrant and look at our 60 degree angle, 60 degree angle, because that was our reference angle. Now look at the point at 60 degrees. Okay, it's 1/2 comma square root of 3 over 2. So a lot of this hinges on knowing what the point on the unit circle is in the first quadrant. So basically you just need to know these 5 points. Okay. The 1, 0, and 0, 1 are incredibly easy. The other 3 are pretty easy as well. Just make sure you know these. So this point is 1/2 comma square root of 3 over 2. That's step 3, is just to locate that corresponding point in the first quadrant. Now all we need to do is figure out what quadrant we're in. We're in the second quadrant. We know in the second quadrant x values are negative, the y values stay positive. So all we're going to do is take the x value of this point and make it negative, and therefore our point is negative 1/2 comma square root of 3 over 2. And that's all you have to do to figure out the point 120 degrees. Now there's our point again right here at negative 1/2 comma square root of 3 over 2. And again, depending on who your teacher is, they might want for you to include that unit of radians, because ultimately it's based off the radius of this circle, and because of that, that's our units, and that's why it's called the unit circle, because the unit is in radians. However, if you leave it off, just make sure that you understand that your units are still radians. Just like if let's say you told your friend, yeah, I just ran 2.3. Well, they might say 2.3 what, right? It's important that you stipulate that's miles, kilometers, or whatever. So that's it for finding that point. Now let's just say we want to figure out another point. Okay, we can just stay on this app and do it really quickly. Let's say we wanted to figure out, let's go to the fourth quadrant, 330 degrees. Well, notice, what's your reference angle here? What's the measure of this right here? Give me a second. Okay, so 330 degrees, you can see you're just 30 degrees away from the x-axis. So what you would do is you'd go to the first quadrant and see what that point is at 30. So that point at 30 degrees is square root of 3 over 2 comma 1/2. But since we are below the x-axis, the only thing that's going to change is that y value is going to become negative, and therefore your point is square root of 3 over 2 comma negative 1/2. And you can do this for any point on the unit circle. If we go to 315, we see that our reference angle is 45 degrees. So if you notice, this point is the same at 45, only the y value is negative because it's below the x-axis. So just play around with this app and you'll quickly see that there's a lot of symmetry and simple rules of x and y values. And this is why we use the unit circle, because it's constructed within the coordinate plane and it's easy to just flip negatives and change x and y values depending on the first quadrant. So that leads us to, let's go to 180 for example. Well, we've kind of already looked at these points, but notice this is the same as at 0, except the x value is negative because it's negative 1, 0, and the radius of the unit circle is 1. Again, we can go and make the radius r, and then the point would be negative r comma 0, or negative 1r comma 0r. Now you might be asking what happens in the third quadrant. Well, let's do 210 for example. So at 210 our reference angle is 30 degrees. We are 30 degrees from 180. If we go back to our point in the first quadrant at 30 degrees, it's square root of 3 over 2 comma 1/2. Now in the third quadrant we know that both x and y are negative, so we just make both of these values negative to get our point at 210, which will be negative square root of 3 over 2 comma negative 1/2. So I want you to just play around with this for a while. I think it'll really solidify these concepts and give you some kind of vision and visual that you can remember. And then we might have, for example, at 270 degrees, we would have the same point at 90 degrees, except it's going to be the y value will be negative. So therefore our point at 270 will be 0, negative 1 instead of 0, comma 1. So that's it for all the unit circle points at all the unit circle points and what they represent. Give me a second. Let me see if I can pull up a unit circle with every single point on it. Alright, so here is the unit circle, all points on the unit circle. You can kind of see there's a lot going on, which is why I like this app, because it only gives you one point at a time. However, I did want to give you every single point on the unit circle, just to see kind of every point is based on a point in the first quadrant. So for example, down here at 240, your reference angle is 60. It's the same as this point, except both x and y are negative, and every point works like that. So keep that in mind as you are studying the unit circle. You need to know every point on it, and again, you can just go back to the first quadrant to figure out any point on the unit circle. If you have any other questions about figuring out a point on the unit circle, let me know.